Rami Khouri is a distinguished public policy fellow at American University of Beirut, and he's joining us live from Boston. Mr. Khouri, always a pleasure to have you with us on Aljazeera. I want to start with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's comments that the ceasefire is now up to Sinwar. This is something the U.S. has maintained since the war began. They say that the ceasefire is up to Hamas. But the U.S. allowed its ally Israel to assassinate the last leader of Hamas, who was leading the ceasefire efforts on Hamas's part.
Well, according to what we've been hearing for the last couple of weeks, it's basically the Israelis who are the obstacle to a ceasefire, that Hamas has accepted all the conditions and the alterations that were made, and it's the Israelis that were holding out and kept changing the terms. So it's not totally clear. The Americans, I think, just out of tradition, blame everything on the Arab side, the Palestinian side, the people allied with Iran. But the reality, I think, is much more clear that the obstacle to a ceasefire and an exchange of prisoners and hostages probably is Benjamin Netanyahu.
And we've heard the Israeli reaction to Sinwar's appointment, and they say this makes them even more of a target. Do you think that they will increase their efforts to assassinate Sinwar?
Well, they've always assassinated senior leaders of Palestinian resistance movements, whether it's the PLO or Fatah or some of the other movements, the PFLP or the Hamas or Hezbollah, the Lebanese. So they probably will try to assassinate more people, but it doesn't do any good. It's bizarre that the Israelis don't see that when they assassinate somebody, they get somebody more radical. And this is just what happened when Haniyeh was assassinated. Sinwar took over. Sinwar is generally seen to be a little bit more hardline, whereas Haniyeh is generally seen to be a little bit more not flexible, but pragmatic. But the position of Hamas is not made by one person. It's made by a collective leadership that chooses these people. And they've clearly, repeatedly made overtures towards Israel, towards some kind of long-term truce before the October 7 attack. And even since October 7, they've clearly agreed to go into ceasefire negotiations. So really the situation is one in which we need to have significant pressure on everybody, whoever is to blame, to accept these terms, get the ceasefire done, do the exchanges, and move on to the next phase, which is going to be even more complicated, to govern Palestine and to possibly lead, once the Israelis leave Gaza, to lead to a negotiation for a permanent resolution of the Palestine-Israel conflict, which is way more complex, but we have to aim for that at some point.
Yeah, Mr. Khouri, the ceasefire process has been faltering at best. What impact do you think Sinwar's leadership will have on that process, given he's seen as the mastermind of the October 7th attack? Again, we heard from our correspondent, Patty Culhane, just before you, that it's very interesting that Antony Blinken didn't denigrate Sinwar in any way, but what are you expecting from the Israelis?
Yeah. That may or may not be significant. Blinken is not a major player, as far as we know.
But he's representing the American view in this, right?
Yeah, he's the Secretary of State, but he's come to the Middle East 15 times to tell everybody to cool it down. And all that's happened after each visit is that the confrontations across the Middle East spread even further afield, and more people joined the fight, like the Ansarullah in Yemen, like the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. And now you've got Iran directly fighting with Israel. So I wouldn't pay much attention to the Secretary of State's statements. But it's possible that they're being a little bit more careful now. I think the real driver here is that the American President Biden is desperate, absolutely desperate, to get the ceasefire done before he leaves office. Partly for his own legacy, so that he's not forever known as Genocide Joe, and partly to help the Kamala Harris, who he expects to succeed him, to give her a chance to move on to the next stage of peacemaking in the Middle East. So I think it's what Biden is trying to do that's the most significant.
Mr. Khouri, thank you as always for your analysis. Rami Khouri in Boston.